Thanks, Gary. You're listening to Search the Scriptures Daily, a program in which we encourage everyone who desires to know God's truth to look to God's Word for all that is essential for salvation and living one's life in a way that is pleasing to Him. We've been discussing the subject of psychology in the church for a number of weeks now in this first segment of our program, and lately we've been going over some of the myths that Christians and others believe and have deluded them into turning to psychological counselors for their everyday problems of living. Last week, we presented quote after quote from psychiatric researchers and psychological studies that the belief that professional counselors with PhDs and MD degrees are more effective than non-professionals, and that belief is a myth. And myth, of course, meaning, Dave, it's simply not true.
All of the studies show this.
Right. Just remind some of our listeners who were with us last week, our viewers, and maybe some new viewers or listeners, renowned psychiatrist, research psychiatrist actually, Jerome Frank tells us that although about 6.5 million Americans see mental health professionals yearly, no scientific research has demonstrated conclusively that professional psychotherapists produce results sufficiently better than non-professionals.
And Tom, that's not for a lack of making the studies. There are plenty of studies out there, and they all confirm the same inadequacy of psychotherapy.
Right. One of the myths that we discussed at length in other programs is the erroneous belief that psychotherapy or psychological counseling is scientific. That delusion is promoted simply because the practitioners of psychotherapy have advanced degrees. Dave, you've mentioned some of the studies. Can you recall the just to give us one?
In one of his books, E. Fuller refers to a test. Well, there have been a number of them where they matched Western psychiatrists against witch doctors. They did some in India. Another test, they did some in Haiti. And
now, this is no joke, Dave. This is not a mockery. We're talking about native healers.
Yeah, they call them brujos or shamans, witch doctors, medicine men, various names in various societies, but it's all the same thing. Anyway, the outcome was that, it's just pretty much a dead heat. The only major difference was that the witch doctors charged less and released their patients sooner. Now, the witch doctors, witch doctors also in some of the tests had better results. Basically, what is the witch doctor using? Is he using magic? Well, it's the power of suggestion, a lot of it. Now, we can talk about demonic power that some of them have, but many of them, they're phonies. It's just the power of suggestion.
Well, Dave, we're going to get into the vehicle of psychotherapy. It's conversation. But before we get to that, here's a quote from the Handbook of Psychotherapy and Behavior Change. They say, although there are large numbers of therapies, each containing its own rationale and specific techniques, there is little evidence to suggest the superiority of one school over another. Now, that's amazing because there are more than 500 different methodologies or approaches.
Tom, that's just a kind of a left-handed compliment. That's another way of saying none of them work.
Right.
I'm sorry. I don't know if people out there, maybe we're talking to some who are going to a psychiatrist or a Christian psychologist for counseling, and now we're just really undermining your confidence in this. We're simply telling you the facts. Now, if it works, it will be because you believe it will work. Now, why don't we believe that God's Word is true? Instead of having confidence in God's Word, we're now being taught to have confidence in a counselor. But one of Christ's names is Counselor. So let's go to Him and to His Word.
Right. Dave, here's the way, good friends of ours, Martin and Deidre Bogman, who have written extensively in this area, from their research, this is what they tell us, that psychotherapy works. On the one hand, On what basis does it work? As I mentioned, 500 different therapies, many of them contradictory to one another. So it's not the therapies or the techniques that's effective.
And some of them are very bizarre, Tom.
Exactly. Well, we quoted Dr. Hans Strupp from Vanderbilt University last week. This is what he says. Psychotherapy is most helpful to those who need it least. Now, Dave, that's telling us something about this whole field. In other words, if the problems are, that anybody could take care of, then they can be effective. If it's something that is really a problem, forget it.
In other words, it can't deal with real problems.
Well, Dave, I think for our audience, our listeners, the viewers, what psychotherapy and psychological counseling are all about, and this is what we're focusing on in these programs, it has to do with conversation. Now, if conversation is the medium of this approach to solving people's problems, it's pretty much the same kind of technique that we mentioned shamans, healers, they give their patients, clients, whatever you want to call them, they give them ideas. They have a conversation with them.
Tom, and you've got where you're going here, but one of the worst problems is then drugs are prescribed, for so-called chemical imbalance. It doesn't have anything to do with the brain. It could. There could be real wires crossed or some nutritional deficiency in the brain. Tom, I don't want to get off on a side issue that you want to deal with later, but that tells you something. Is there something wrong with the brain? Well, conversation isn't going to help that. But then they're going to give you some kind of a drug as well to influence your brain. We're getting kind of mixed up here. Which is it? Is it the brain or is it the mind? Whoops, now we're getting into something else. The mind is different from the brain. The mind does thinking. And what the conversation is trying to get at is, what are your thoughts? You got negative thoughts or inferiority thoughts, or you're just you have fears, compulsive behavior. Now, if they're going to mess with your brain, I'm sure you want to come back to that we're getting outside the bounds here, and we've got real problems. But in the meantime, what are we dealing with? Attitudes?
I think so, Dave. Well, going back to the Bob Gans approach, they say psychotherapy works based on the research, but as Dr. Strupp says, it works best for those who need it the least. Okay, it provides.
Tom,
go ahead.
Tom, you gave plenty of statistics last week that it works as well for non-professionals as it does for professionals. Yeah. So basically, if you're willing to change your attitude, that's about all they can do.
And again, the medium is conversation. So they say that it provides, in many cases, mild to moderate relief, just like having a conversation. I sit down and particularly if I'm going to listen to you and you need somebody to listen to your problems and you want to go through them and so on. This is the realm. This is the arena of psychotherapy and psychological counseling.
Tom, it can even do it. You can go to the dentist with a horrible toothache, and when you get in the dental chair, it's gone. Or you go to the doctor with a problem. It's kind of a placebo, okay.
Well, now we're getting into, if it works, when does it work? And how it works is really common to all the psychotherapies. Well, what are they? Well, they would say, number one, it depends on the individual. The client, is he willing, as you mentioned earlier, Dave, is he willing to...
For more information about the Berean Call, call us toll-free at our order number or visit our website,